that was the good news, was that he was going to understand the issues and write an intelligent, careful opinion. The bad news is that when my annotated Sherlock Holmes appeared in 2004, he wrote a scathing review saying, why would anybody waste the ink on publishing a book like this? The Sherlock Holmes stories are only fit for 12-year-old boys.
That's terrible.
Oh my God, yeah. Saying, do we agree with Judge Posner? No! So I was a little nervous about writing the opinion.
Wow.
So all in all, we're not going to ask him to contribute to the volume 3.
Yeah, a little essay by the
Just in case.
So I thought that we would start out this morning by telling you, by having our panelists tell you how they first met Sherlock Holmes. And Michael, you are prepared, so you can begin.
Curiously, I came across two things that I wrote. One of them you will enjoy and the other you will put up with. The first is Sherlock Holmes of London, a verse in 4 fits that I wrote about 2 years ago. It goes, if you have a missing heir to locate or a bank you have to guard, there's only one detective and he's not from Scotland Yard. When the Duke has lost his coronet or the treaty's gone astray, it's Sherlock Holmes of London who's called in to save the day. But the dog did in the nighttime only Sherlock Holmes can hear. He knows why the boot was missing from the doorway of the pier. You may find him considering where redheads can be found or lost in foot while studying the footprints of a hound. In the frigid nights of winter when the fog swirls in the street and the gaslight from the street lamp don't illuminate your feet, and you hear the steady clopping of a hansom down the Mews, why, it's Sherlock Holmes of London out following his clues. Queen and Wolf and Wibsey and a host of private texts, along with Marvel and Maloney and others of their sex, and Gregson and Lestrade, all of them have their place. But it's Sherlock Holmes of London who will trust to solve the case.
I wasn't told to prepare a poem.
No.
I always try to be one step ahead of you.
Lindsay, you are a poem.
Next panelist.
I came to Sherlock Holmes when I had finished all the Nancy Drew mysteries. I think I was about 10. And I asked my dad what I should read. And he said, why don't you read? And I still think this is the most outstanding advice from a Sherlockian. My father was a Sherlockian. He said, read The Adventure of the Speckled Band. And if you don't like that, then quit. But if you like The Adventure of the Speckled Band, keep going. So I did. And I never stopped reading the Sherlock Holmes mysteries. I went to the Longview Public Library in Southwest Washington State, and I was looking for the collected adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and I marched straight to the section I always went to, and I'm searching high and low and everywhere, and I couldn't find it. I looked through all of the books. I knew my alphabetization by that time, and I'm just staring at the D's, and Sherlock Holmes mysteries are nowhere to be found. So my favorite librarian, Sandra, was like, sweetie, can I help you? And I said, well, I don't really think much of a library that doesn't even stock the Sherlock Holmes mysteries. You realize, like everybody's heard of Sherlock Holmes. I can't find him anywhere. And she was like, well, darling, you're looking at the kids section. I mean, Sherlock Holmes is adult fiction up on the mezzanine because Sherlock Holmes is for everyone.
And would have been found on the W's, of course. No.
Yes, well, I was looking at the wrong part of the alphabet altogether. But that was my first foray upstairs to the mezzanine.
Wow.
To pick up the Sherlock Holmes.
Well, that's great. But of course, it's
I
nonfiction.
would not agree with Judge Posner that
I would not, since I was a 10-year-old girl.
Do you want to go next, Lori?
I kind of backed into the whole Sherlockian thing because I decided that I wanted to write about a young woman who was who had an extraordinary detecting mind, and I sort of quickly realized that she was a young female feminist 20th century and therefore vastly superior example of the Sherlock Holmes mind. And I hardly read some of the stories beforehand because you always read, Speckled Bandit and Hound of the Baskervilles in high school, and they had never really caught me. And it's fascinating how nothing catches you if you're not ready for it. I mean, World War I poetry, I can remember reading the World War I poetry and thinking, this is just, what is this stupid stuff? And it is incredibly powerful and brings me to tears now.
Yeah.
But if you're not ready for it, you don't hear it. And when I was in my 30s, I suddenly realized that there was a character behind these stories, these adventures that to me beforehand had been just sort of old-fashioned English adventures. And I started reading them. When I first started writing the stories, Holmes was definitely, in my mind, a supporting actor, and I was not really interested in his complexity of character. But as I grew along and I started, writing them myself, I realized what a very, very interesting and complex person this was. Whether he's fictional or non-fictional, it matters not, because as a person, he had an awful lot to say about how his world worked.
Mm-hmm.
When I was 7 or 8, my parents would take us over to our grandparents' house, where they would all go in the kitchen and play cards. And me and my brothers would be in the living room, kind of hanging out and trying to get each other to put our fingers in the light sockets. And my grandparents had a little library about the size of a closet, but it was right. It was a genuine library. That's what it was built for. It was right off the family room. And I would end up in there sometimes and looking at the old books. And the very first one I pulled off to read was this. And it's Tales of Sherlock Holmes. It was published in the early 1900s. It doesn't have a copyright date. It was 1910, 1906. After Hound of Baskervilles, but before Valley Fear. Anyway, this is that actual book. And there were some parts that I would skip over, like in the study in Scarlet, there's all this backstory about things happening on the Great American Desert, right? And honestly, I skipped that. I wanted the stuff about Sherlock Holmes, and I would just kind of go by all the rest of it. Eventually, I got older and I read everything. But I didn't try to do anything with it as a writer until 1980 or so, and then I tried to write a pastiche, and I discovered that I couldn't write a pastiche. I wasn't that good. I couldn't write anything that sounded like Arthur Conan Doyle, and so I gave up. I didn't try to do anything again for a little while. But anyway, what I finally write now is not a pastiche. It's about the letters that people send to Sherlock Holmes, and they get delivered. Most of you probably know they would get delivered to Abbey National Building Society Bank, and I was afraid for a long time, not of the Conan Doyle estate, but of Abbey National. I was afraid they would come after me about, what are you doing with this fictitious clerk that you turned into a lawyer, and now you have no right. But they never did. They didn't find out about me, and they still don't know. And now they've taken that building down, so I think I'm safe. And if I'm not safe, I can talk to Les.
Michael, you wanted the poem was lovely, but now I want to hear the real story.
I have that written down also. A British magazine asked me to write a thing about why I decided to write about Moriarty, so I gave them this, and I will read it to you. Before I do that, a little anecdote. I was in London many years ago, and it was a pea soup fog. I was in a pub that I remember was like 3 steps down in the building, and I was in there, and the fog was out, and while I was sitting there drinking my pint, a handsome cab passed by. Pop, 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 pop. And I said to the person I was with, isn't it amazing, with all decadence, with all the only thing I can think of when a handsome cab passes by is Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
And the man to my right said, oh, do you like Sherlock Holmes? And I said, yes, we do. And we had this chat for about half an hour about it. He really knew his stuff. And then he got up and said, well, I have to go now. And he turned to the publican and he said, good night. And the publican said, good night, my lord. And before I could go, he went down. And And I was telling this to someone years later, and they said, oh, that must have been Lord so-and-so, I don't remember the name, who was head of the Baker Street Regulators at the time.
Wow.
Did I know? Anyway, okay, now. Why Moriarty? I am the author of 5 so far novels casting Sherlock Holmes' nemesis, Professor Moriarty, as my hero. Anti-hero, perhaps, you ask? No, certainly not. Hero. One reviewer of my most recent Moriarty, who thinks evil, said that she enjoyed the book, but she wasn't planning to read anymore because she couldn't accept Moriarty as a good guy. Well, I sympathize with her view, but it doesn't hold up under what biblical scholars call a textual analysis. Moriarty is given more than a passing mention in only 2 Holmes stories, and even in these cases, he's kept off stage. We have only Holmes' word that Moriarty is the Napoleon of crime, and perhaps Holmes is biased. He provides us with a narrative that is at best inconsistent. As Moriarty himself explains, as excerpted in my story years ago and in a different place, Holmes had the temerity to describe me as an organizer of half that is evil and nearly all that is undetected in this great city of London. What crimes I had committed, he was curiously silent about. Watson did not ask for specifics, and none were offered. In The Final Problem, Watson relates that Holmes appeared one day and told him that he was being threatened by me and that he had already been attacked twice that day by my agents and was expecting to be attacked again, probably by a man using an air rifle. If that were so, was it not thoughtful of him to go to the residence of his close friend and thus place him also in deadly peril? Holmes declares that in 3 days he will be able to place the professor with all the principal members of his gang in the hands of the police. Why wait? Holmes gives no coherent reason. But until then, Holmes avers, he is in grave danger. If this were so, would not Scotland Yard gladly have given Holmes a room, nay, a suite of rooms in the hotel of his choosing, or in the yard itself, to keep him safe? But Holmes says nothing will do but that he must flee the country, and once again Watson believes him. Is not unquestioning friendship a wonderful thing? I could go on, indeed, in the story the professor does, but I think I've made my point. I'm justified in portraying Professor Moriarty in a way other than Watson's second-hand and somewhat biased view. My Professor Moriarty is indeed a criminal, but more in the mode of Robin Hood or Simon Templar than Al Capone or Charlie Manson. He commits crimes to support his scientific research and picks targets that deserve to be fleeced. The reason, in my boast, that Holmes sees Moriarty as the greatest villain unhung is that the professor is ever so slightly smarter than Holmes. Now, it was by a series of happy accidents that I came to write the Moriarty stories. Another author, I think it was John Jakes, had suggested to a paperback publisher that he do a book about Professor Moriarty. The publisher indicated a vague interest. Then suddenly this other author got extremely busy with some other series. My agent asked me if I would give it a shot. It was a cheap paperback house, and they might turn out not to want it, and we weren't sure we could get the rights, and I was writing mainly, in those days you needed the rights, and I was writing mainly science fantasy, and this was during one of those brief periods when nobody seemed to be reading Sherlock Holmes anymore, but what the heck. I had always loved the Holmes stories, and the chance to insinuate myself into this world was hard to resist. I reread the relevant Holmes stories, The Final Problem and The Valley of Fear, and realized that Conan Doyle's Professor Moriarty was an evanescent being, a mere shadow upon the wall. I could, without violating the material in the Holmes canon, flesh him out into a more interesting, and dare I say it, likable character than he had hitherto seen. But I didn't want to do a hack job. I felt that the new story should be worthy of what had come before. After more travail than was warranted for the possible advance from the paperback house, I produced the portion that outlined to The Infernal Device. Just at this time, a publisher named Bernie Geist was looking for an author to ghostwrite the autobiography of some movie star. My agent suggested me. What has he done? Asked Bernie. Whimsical science fiction, explained my agent.
Whimsical.
10 years to Doomsday, The Unicorn Girl, Transmission Error. Oh, asked Bernie, doubt dripping from his voice. But he really can write, my agent insisted. Look, here's a portion of an outline that he just turned in. I'm of course imagining the dialogue, but it must have done something like that. So Bernie read the P&O for The Infernal Device and asked to meet me. Just who is this movie star, I asked. Screw the movie star, Bernie explained. I like the way you write. I like this proposal. I think there's still some interest in Sherlock Holmes, at least enough to get you some decent money for this. Bernie was essentially a packager, a publisher who sets up deals to sell to other publishers. I'll give you an advance of, and he named an enormous sum of money to me at that time for a 3-book contract. Bernie had a fireman's pole in his office leading to the floor below. It was true. Bernie had a fireman's pole. Wow, a fireman's pole, I said upon seeing it, immediately slid down. I think this is what clinched the deal for me. It had been Bernie's practice to test prospective writers, editors, and such at the end of their interviews by seeing if he could cajole them into sliding down the pole.
Oh, no.
I hesitate to suggest what this might have signified to him. And here I slid down even before the end of our first meeting. Now all I had to do was write the book. I sat down at my typewriter. Yes, child, we used typewriters back then. And Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated. And still we used typewriters. I immediately came against a new and unexpected plot. And this part is literally absolutely true. The rest was too, but this is
Especially true.
The advance I was getting came to something over 50 cents a word, which in those days was an awful lot of money. Way more than I had ever been paid for before. I would type a word, the. Is that a 50-cent word? It was much like the nickel words I'd been writing. The professor. Is that worth $1?
Yeah.
Writing is easy, Gene Fowler once said. All you do is stare at a blank sheet of paper until the drops of blood form on your forehead.
I've seen that.
Well, day after day, I stared at that blank sheet and mopped the blood from my forehead until I had a miraculous breakthrough when I read an article in Esquire magazine by Tom Wolfe. It was about Las Vegas, and it began, hernia, 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 and so on down the page for perhaps 120 hernias. Now, at the time, Esquire paid about 50 cents a word. So Wolfe made about $60 with the word hernia. Well, goddammit, if Wolfe could do it, so could I. The words came more easily after that, although, as I tell students on the rare occasions when I teach writing, if you care about what you write and want to get it right, it will still be the hardest work you've ever done. When The Infernal Device was published, it was nominated for an Edgar and for an American Book Award, and I decided that perhaps mystery writing was my forte after all, and I'm still at it.
It's such a better story than my introduction to Sherlock Holmes, so we'll skip that part.
I was afraid that was a bit long, but I appreciate your reaction.
So I wanted to ask these fine writers of fiction a serious question about whether the genre is, now I'm not talking about your career, Michael, whether the genre is better off for going to having invented Sherlock Holmes or not. Where would mystery fiction have gone without that sort of giant model of
I would say that's a yes.
ratiocination detective? Say that one. Opinions?
I don't know where detective mystery fiction would have gone, but it occurred to me that westerns would have a problem. Because I think the character of Sherlock Holmes, although it wasn't the first recurring detective, I mean, that would have been an Edgar Allan Poe's character, right?
Oh, 3 stories, yeah.
Yeah. So the Sherlock Holmes character was a character who's removed from the people around him. He's a loner, and he's a loner in I think the same way that Clint Eastwood was a loner in all of his westerns, in the way Shane was a loner in that western, and I think that's part of what made him unique and different, is that he's set apart from ordinary people. He's someone you want on your side. You wouldn't want to be him necessarily, but he's the guy you'd want to go to. The other thing that I thought about in response to the question you sent us, and I don't know whether this is unique, but to Sherlock Holmes, but there's the characteristic that in all of, I think, almost all of the novels, I mean, all of the novels and almost all of the short stories, they're not about, how shall I say this? They're not stories where the person you identify with, the emotional impetus, the investment you get is with the detective. Those emotional things come with the people that he's working for and dealing with. But Sherlock Holmes is something else. He grabs you not with your emotional investment about what's going to happen to him, but about what he does and how he works. And I think that makes him different from almost any other form of fiction. But there are certainly more since then, and you can probably make the case for Edgar Allan Poe's characters as well.
May I?
I'm sorry if that's rude.
I just think this is fascinating because that was such a perfect answer and a wonderful answer and exactly the opposite of the way I feel about Sherlock Holmes. and that just goes to show that different readers react to these stories in very different ways, but I have immense emotional investment in Sherlock Holmes. And I get a lot of emotional, traction out of those stories, and I think ultimately it's for me a portrait of an absolutely stunningly beautiful friendship that spans decades and decades, and it's a brothers in arms relationship that I admire, and who wouldn't want to be, the guy who clearly has post-traumatic stress disorder, who is invalided from from foreign wars, who comes back and needs a purpose and finds this sort of eccentric loner who, just by virtue of befriending him, you get to have a life of adventure, a life of purpose. And I think that's very emotional. It is for me anyway. And I think the question that Les originally posed is also very interesting because my friend Ian, he always says regarding Walt Whitman, and I love Walt Whitman, but my friend Ian says about that poet, I knew something had to come along to change poetry. I just wish it had been something else. Which is sort of the same structure of the question that Les asked. But to me, I think it's more along the lines of what flight would look like without the Wright brothers than what poetry would look like without Walt Whitman. And balloons, yes, well, that would be cool. But yeah, dirigibles, you're absolutely right. Steampunk world. But I think that in terms of detective fiction, the difference between somebody like Dupin and Sherlock Holmes actually isn't that Sherlock Holmes is deliberately removed. I think that he feels so much that he actually, absents himself from that aspect of it, or else he wouldn't be effective. Or at least that's how I read the character. Now, obviously, anybody can read the character however they like. But I think that with Dupin, you don't have a lot of emotion. You don't have a detective who's changed emotionally by the cases that he's attempting to solve. You don't have someone who, at the end of the Boscombe Valley mystery, is devastated by the results of this case and says to Watson, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." Essentially, well, that just sucked. And he's deeply emotionally involved in his cases, and I think that comes through in a lot of them.
I want to just interject as a comment. I don't want to stop anything else. I was thinking, Michael, when you were talking about the Westerns, I wrote a paper for a book called Remarkable Characters of Arthur Monroe, called something like Down These Mean Streets Sherlock Holmes Must Go. Raymond Chandler, writing that famous essay about Civil War and murder, argued that Marlowe was sort of the anti-Sherlock Holmes. He didn't have a lot of good things to say about Holmes. And my point was, in my essay, was that he was completely wrong. That if you look at the characteristics that he lays out for the classic hero, Holmes fits all of those. He is that man who walks down those mean streets, I think.
I think that one of the problems that modern people have with Holmes, as far as interpreting him goes, whether you like him or not, is that we are no longer Victorian. And we interpret Holmes from our point of view and think of Victorians, their pros and their, well, to a Victorian. When they read Sherlock Holmes was the ultimate perfect Victorian, not as a prude, but as an absolutely rational man. The Victorians prided themselves on their rationality and on their ability to logically think things through, and so Sherlock Holmes was that creation. To somebody of that period reading that story, he represented all that was best in their minds of their period.
Yeah, the gentleman scientist.
Where do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that speaking as a writer, I am regularly filled with amazement and respect for Conan Doyle because he really created this entire genre. I mean, we are all here in Bouchercon because of the kind of shaping that he did for his story. And I think Michael mentioned this, the idea of a series character. But it's extraordinary to look at that period and to say, well, yes, Dupin appears in a couple of stories, but this business of deliberately shaping a storyline that isn't dependent on knowing what happened last month in the string, that you could pick up at any point, that you felt you knew these characters, but you didn't have to feel that if you missed one, you were completely lost. Other than, obviously when they serialized a novel. But this creative new way of shaping a storyline that is over a period of decades. I am at my 20-year plus point for the Russell and Holmes stories. And we are having these conversations about how do you introduce people to a new book without having them say, yeah, but this is number 12 or 13. I won't know what has gone on beforehand. Which, believe it or not, there are people who don't know all of my books. Which I but this business of telling a story that is independent. I mean, each novel, each short story has to be an independent tale of its own, and its own energy and its own interests, and yet form part of the community that is a sort of overlying story arc. You could argue that the Conan Doyle stories don't have a story arc. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that looking at the way the stories interrelate, you get a feeling of this friendship, this emotional bond between these two men and this one man and his larger community, this odd brother of his and the housekeeper, and how that relates to the world and our world as readers and the world, the Victorian world as readers.
So you might say the character wasn't complete until the last story.